Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've got another quick list video for everyone. We're going to be looking at 5 Marvel comic book runs I wish more people read. And of course with a title like this, it is a bit presumptuous, but for whatever reason I feel like these runs are often overlooked or just maybe not talked about as much these days. And honestly, I'm hoping to showcase these books and maybe jumpstart more interest in some of these titles because I think they're a lot of fun. But before we jump into my picks, I do want to shout out the channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link in this video's description, and if you see anything on the site you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's probably the best way to support the channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's go ahead and get started with today's list. Okay, first up today in no particular order, we have Silver Surfer, the Epic Collection, Freedom. I really wanted to talk about this book for a few reasons today. I believe it was just recently reprinted. This edition I have is an older printing, but this was one of my first early gateways into the character of Silver Surfer. Yes, I had read his early appearances in the pages of Silver Surfer, and I had dabbled very briefly with some of the Stan Lee stuff, but the bulk of the material we have here was really where I started to jump into some of his solo series. And this book itself has a couple different creators. I think most notably for me is Steve Englehart, a great writer here in this series. The events of this book occur after that Stan Lee standalone series that ran for, 18 issues give or take, but it really has Silver Surfer breaking out of the barrier that surrounds Earth for him and back into the spaceways. He's now a kind of star-traveling surfer once again, and this is honestly where they just unleash this character back into the grander cosmic Marvel universe, and honestly, this is where the fun starts for me. I absolutely adore this character, and I think that the possibilities for him are near limitless. I also think that this is a fun primer for the character. Obviously, I'm always going to recommend that early Fantastic Four story with him and Galactus, but I think outside of that, this is honestly pretty accommodating to new readers. Stan Lee's run is also very fun, but this series, it really feels more contemporary than it is. I think the issues in here really hold up. I love so much of the art we get in this collection, and it's just really fun, old school cosmic Marvel. I think for anyone that's a fan of kind of science fiction, character drama kind of stuff, this is just really, really fun. The Surfer is such a tragic and kind of philosophical and conflicted character, but even within that, he has this kind of levity that's brought about by his adventurous spirit, and you get elements of all of that in this collection. I also want to draw some attention to this run in particular, this Epic Collection, because I think that this is kind of sandwiched between two better-known eras for Silver Surfer. Before this, we have Stan Lee, who of course had this as one of his all-time favorite comic book characters, and then we have on the other end of this, the incredible Jim Starlin era for Silver Surfer. In my mind, that is probably my favorite and definitive Silver Surfer writer, Jim Starlin. I just think for old-school cosmic Marvel, no one did it better than Starlin. But for me, this run is still really important. Like I said, it's kind of sandwiched between giants, and I think maybe because of that, it gets a little bit overlooked. I'm so happy to see Marvel not only releasing this Epic Collection, but releasing a reprint. I'm hoping a lot of people can go on and snag this book before it goes out of print again, because I do think it's really fun. I think, like I said, it's a great early Silver Surfer book. I know it was for me, and it got me hooked in a way that I felt myself enjoying the Jim Starlin era even more. Don't miss out on Silver Surfer Freedom. Next up, we have another Epic Collection. This is Punisher Epic Collection, Circle of Blood. This is one of the earlier eras in Punisher's solo work as well. I know I said very similar things over at Silver Surfer, but yeah, these are some of the earliest Punisher solo series, and I think that there's a lot of fun to be had in this little collection. This includes work written by Steve Grant, Joe Duffy, Mike Barron, and even Ann Nesenti, to name a few. Got a bunch of great artists on this as well. I know one of my favorites was Mike Zeck. But this era of the Punisher, for whatever reason, I think is also often overlooked. I think that this obviously takes place after some of his appearances in Amazing Spider-Man or some of those other books where he didn't have a solo series yet. He didn't even have miniseries, really. And this is really just breaking him into the world of solo self-titled stuff. I really like Punisher, and I think that sometimes he maybe goes a little too explicit or graphic for me, or grim dark. But some of these early works, obviously, yes, there's still a bit of carnage, there's still a bit of violence and stuff, but I think it's pretty subdued by modern standards, while still giving us a tremendously great feel for this Marvel Comics character. I do think that, again, we tend to focus more on modern Punisher when we see a lot of these reprinted collections, things like that. I love going back to some of the roots of this character, some of his early stuff, and I just think that this is a whole era that I wish got more light. I wish it got more reproductions, because honestly, it can be a blast. I know Punisher can be a controversial character, but I do think some of his earlier stuff here that feels a bit more tame, I think he's a lot more accessible to a broader audience. Obviously, I've heard, again, great things about a lot of his modern runs, but there's something about these classic tales of the Punisher that really just punch out for me. I do think he's an important character in the Marvel Universe, and I do think there's a whole swatch of people that just don't even read this character, maybe because of the violence, that might like a collection like this, that again has stuff toned down to more PG-13 levels. I do think the character is intriguing, tragic, conflicted, deeply flawed, but somehow still heroic in his own way. Really do like this collection. I had a chance to review the whole thing a couple months back on the channel, and honestly, this brings me to a broader point. I know I just talked about the Silver Surfer Epic Collection and now this one. If you haven't read Marvel's Epic Collection line, it's a great way to read bigger runs or chunks of runs for just mainstream Marvel characters. Each Epic Collection has usually at least 20 issues, give or take. It's in a beautiful standard size paperback edition. They release so many of them, and there's sequential issues, which I really love. They'll sometimes grab mini-series and stuff. The only caveat is they release these Epic Collections oftentimes out of order, so you'll get Volume 6, then Volume 20, then Volume 1, things like that. But within each volume, you do get sequential issues, and honestly, it's a great way to brush up on some of these runs, and I'm so happy to see Marvel doing things like that, even with Punisher here. Next up, we're going to be looking at the Adam Warlock Omnibus from Marvel Comics. This was an omnibus that dropped, I think, sometime last year in 2023, and honestly, this is a fun book that I think a lot of people are sleeping on. This contains not only the earlier adventures of this character in the pages of things like Fantastic Four and Thor, but also some of his very first series, like in the pages of Roy Thomas's Warlock series, and it brings us all the way through into the Jim Starlin era. This is more of a Bronze Age title at this point, and it's really just foundational, kind of older Marvel cosmic fare. I think that this is a very comprehensive omnibus. It spans so many different eras within comic book history, and I think in that way, it is just a fascinating book to pick up. And yes, I know this video is talking about comic runs, but there's honestly a few comic runs contained even in this single omnibus. And while I do think this character run under Roy Thomas is fascinating, some of his early solo stuff where he plays a Christ-like figure who goes down to save a world from corruption, I think actually the stuff we get under Jim Starlin is the more fascinating turn for the character. He becomes a purely Marvel cosmic character, and we get to see him just kind of lock horns with characters like Thanos. We get to see appearances by Gamora, and a cavalcade of other cosmic Marvel characters. I know the modern Marvel cosmic saga gets so much love in general, everything that started with Annihilation and went through, is it War of Kings? I'm trying to remember where that ended. But that whole modern cosmic Marvel era, it gets so much credit and esteem, and with good reason. What I've read of it has been phenomenal. But I think we sometimes overlook the older cosmic Marvel era. I know there's some people that only read, exclusively modern comics, but there's so much gold in this older era, especially that kind of Bronze Age cosmic stuff that we got primarily from Jim Starlin. Honestly, I talked about it with Silver Surfer, but he wrote so many incredible books. And there's some real gems there, pun intended. Obviously, he introduced so much of that kind of infinity gems, infinity stones concepts for fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU. If you enjoyed that whole runner with, Infinity War, Endgame, Thanos, all that, that's all Jim Starlin. We have Infinity Gauntlet, the kind of event that talks about all of that, but we see so much of that in the Silver Surfer run. We even see kind of things leading into it, even in the pages of Warlock here. We get to see earlier appearances of Thanos, kind of just doing his villainous stuff, and get to see Adam Warlock, which also, he really plays a pivotal role in the Infinity kind of saga that Starlin did over there. And again, this is obviously before that, but we have so much foundational work being done on that character in the pages of this omnibus. It really is a treat. Like I said, this is a really dynamic and interesting omnibus, and I think it's a run that a lot of people are sleeping on, even with the publication of this omnibus. I think it's passed a lot of people by, but I do think it's worth a read, especially if you're someone who likes to read beyond just the modern books. I do think it's a fascinating character, and particularly in the Jim Starlin era, a really, really good read. Okay, next up, a touch more modern here. We're going to be looking at the Invincible Iron Man by Matt Fraction and Salvador Larroca. This is an oversized hardcover edition. I have the first 2 volumes of this oversized hardcover line. I'm not sure why we still haven't seen omnibuses made of this content, because honestly, this is probably my favorite modern Iron Man run I've ever read any part of. I just think it's a lot of fun. The art from Larroca we get throughout is really polished. It has kind of that digital assisted feel, but it really works for the kind of futurist series or franchise like Iron Man. I think it's just really fitting for the character, and I just like Fraction's touch, just kind of modernizing this character. It feels very fresh. It feels very to date, I would say. It doesn't feel like an Iron Man that's trapped in some other decade. This feels like a modern Iron Man story, and even these stories are getting a bit dated. I do think Fraction really shows up in a lot of my videos, because I think a lot of his runs, especially in Marvel, are often overlooked. I'm a vocal big fan of his run on Fantastic Four. I really even liked his run on Thor. I reviewed both of them on my channel, and for whatever reason, I think that these runs get overlooked. Maybe they're not the #1 top tier run that everyone's talking about, but is that a reason why we should forget them, even if they're pretty solid? Yeah, I don't think so. And maybe it's my opinion, but I think that Matt Fraction's delivered some really consistently solid runs in Marvel Comics history. Oh, the Immortal Iron Fist, that's another one he was doing with Ed Brubaker for a little bit. That's another fantastic run. I think that one maybe gets the most accolades of a lot of his Marvel stuff. But anyway, this Iron Man run I think is fantastic. This is one I don't think I've reviewed on the channel yet. If you'd like to learn more about that, or would like to get a full review from me on this book, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to give this another look. But yeah, this is just a fun one. I think it's a really good gateway comic too. If you like Iron Man on the big screen, you're looking to break into his comic runs, you could do a lot worse than starting with Fraction's run here. Another great modern place I would consider starting too, I really liked Warren Ellis's Iron Man Extremis. I think that had art from Adi Granov, but that's a really fun read as well. That's like a little mini series, but that also kind of relaunches the character, gives us a kind of retelling of the origin story. I think that and this run here by Matt Fraction are fantastic places to start Iron Man personally. But yeah, this is just a run I think is overlooked, and I think in general Matt Fraction, if I haven't made that clear, I think he's overlooked as a Marvel writer. I think that there's so many good issues there that I've enjoyed immensely. Again, maybe it's not the #1 top tier choice when you think about a character and its comic book run, but if you're a fan of these characters, I think all of these runs are at least a solid effort that I've spent hours entertained by. Anyway, don't miss out on the Invincible Iron Man by Matt Fraction and Salvador Larroca. And hey, if you're enjoying this video and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I would just like to invite you to do so. I'm always doing comic book list videos like this, comic book reviews, unboxings, and more. Thank you so much for considering. Now on with the show. Okay, and rounding out our list of 5 Marvel comic book runs I wish more people read, we're going to be talking today about X-treme X-Men by Chris Claremont and Salvador Larroca. And yes, that is the same Salvador Larroca that also did the art for the Invincible Iron Man by Matt Fraction from the previous entry. That was kind of serendipitous that I picked 2 runs for this video that happened to be penciled by the same creator, but maybe I just like this style. And honestly, the way it's depicted in this omnibus is really fascinating. Essentially, we have Larroca's art not being heavily outlined, so there's this kind of like soft feel to the artwork. It almost looks kind of, not like motion blurred, but it's a little ill-defined. And honestly, that lends this really interesting feel to the art throughout this collection. I certainly understand why it's polarizing, but I found myself pretty immersed by it by the end. And this is, again, Chris Claremont, and in my mind, Chris Claremont will always just own the X-Men franchise. I don't mean that literally, but I mean he just has such an indelible mark on this franchise. I think that there's no bigger heavy hitter in the world of X-Men than Chris Claremont. I'm sure that's an opinion that many people share, but I know I certainly do. And I know this is considered later Claremont fare, and I know that it isn't as well regarded as some of his earlier work, and I completely understand that. You know, in the 80s and the 90s, when he is just doing just unbelievable, churning out just classic after classic, I know that this is often overlooked. But frankly, there's still some really fun stories in this whole run. And I know X-treme X-Men was a title that was coming out kind of simultaneously with Grant Morrison's New X-Men, which I believe garnered, a great deal more attention in some ways. But again, I do think even because this run was a bit overshadowed, it doesn't mean it should be overlooked. We have a really great setup where we basically have Destiny, the mutant, kind of prophesying and writing these books of destiny that basically show the future of the world or what can happen. And it's at a time where the team is really not trusting of Professor Xavier. So we have this splinter team showing up, run by Storm. We have characters like Bishop and Rogue and Gambit and Sage and just a bunch of other characters to make this really eclectic, interesting X-team kind of doing their own work. They're trying to find these books of prophecy so they don't get in the wrong hands, or they're trying to liberate them if they're already in the wrong hands, and they're trying to help kind of steer the future of the world in a more positive light. Along the way, we have all of these interesting villain interactions, and I think one of my favorite things about this run that snuck up on me is the fact that we have a lot of really incredible and unique villains show up. It's not just your same standard X-Men villains over and over again. No, we have Claremont introduce new villains that have their own sense of menace, their own motives, and I found it to be extremely refreshing. There's a volume 2 for this run coming out, I think, later this year. I hope to get that to finish out this X-treme X-Men run, but if volume 2 is at least close to as good as this volume 1, I'm sure I'm going to be satisfied, because honestly, I had a blast. And if you want to hear more about my thoughts on this first omnibus, you can check out the review of this title as well that I provided. I'll try to link it to this video. But yeah, that's X-treme X-Men by Chris Claremont and Salvador Larroca. And just like that, those are 5 Marvel comic book runs I wish more people read. I know this was kind of an interesting list. Some of these were kind of collections or a couple different runs kind of just going end to end into each other, but these are all collections I think that have been a bit overlooked that I've had a chance to read, and I've just found myself walking away really entertained. Are these runs the pinnacle of these characters' franchise? Maybe in many cases not so much, but are they still really solid runs that I think if you like these characters or are interested, you'd still probably enjoy reading? Yes, I think they're at least worth recommending. Honestly, one of the reasons I enjoy making lists like this are to also showcase books I feel like not everyone is talking about right at this moment. And that's certainly the case here with this list. These are books that I just personally enjoyed that I hope we can get some more readership for. A lot of these are still in print or getting new reprints or having upcoming editions coming out. There might be a few that are out of print, but anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I would love in the comments, have you read any of these collections? What do you think about them? And beyond that, do you have often overlooked comic book runs in Marvel Comics history that you really liked? What about DC? Are there any comic runs you think more people should explore that are maybe just off the beaten path? Let me know all about that in the comments. I can't wait to see some of the discussions we get to have and all the recommendations we'll see pouring in. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave that like, that comment, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thanks so much. Have a good one.